I got my mistress pregnant. We're getting a divorce, so don't bother coming back. These cruel words were written on a letter enclosed with the divorce papers. I thought Theodore would be thrilled about our child's birth, but he was too busy cheating with his mistress. He didn't even show up for our child's birth or help name them. I could never forgive Theodore. While calming my furious parents, I headed to my in-laws' house. I'm so sorry. We really messed up raising that boy. My in-laws turned pale as they read the letter, apologizing to us. They are such good people that it almost hurts. My father-in-law sighed deeply, looked at my mother-in-law, and muttered, "Maybe we should take him down." My name is Camila. I'm 35 years old. I met Theodore, my husband, in a movie theater in my early 20s. He had tripped over the theater's carpet and spilled popcorn all over the floor. I rushed to help, and he bought me a drink as an apology, and we hit it off. He was there to see a limited-time showing of a famous animated movie. The protagonist's name was the same as mine, Camila. Theodore, a fan of the movie, was very excited. "Your name is Camila? I love that movie. I can't believe you're not someone else." "Me too. Have you seen the latest animated film?" We found we liked the same things, became movie buddies, and eventually started dating. Then, at a restaurant themed around movies, he gave me a ring, and I decided to spend my life with Theodore. Turns out, Theodore had received one of his businessman father's companies and was thriving as a young CEO. So, after getting married, I quit my previous job and joined him as an executive, involved in managing the business. My business school experience was put to good use, and it was a rewarding job. I had thought my in-laws would be intimidating celebs, but they were nothing like that. From our first meeting, they were friendly, and after we got married, they looked after us without fail. We lived close but not too close, maintaining just the right distance. "Camila, I got some gourmet coupons. Let's go eat something delicious. Oh, and it's okay to say no if it's not a good time." They would invite us out to eat and even cook for us. I loved cooking with my mother-in-law. She generously shared her secret ingredients and special sauce tips, which I would practice and serve to Theodore. Sometimes we disagreed, but our arguments were more like playful banters about whether salt or ketchup made the best scrambled eggs. My father-in-law also took such good care of me, it was almost too much. Would getting Mom a facial moisturizer for her birthday be too cheeky? "Oh, I'm at the department store now. I'll pick up some moisturizer for you too." Saying this, he gave me some beauty products I had wanted for a while. Their loving relationship always made me smile. I hoped Theodore and I could have a relationship just like my in-laws. However, our peaceful life didn't last long. When my pregnancy became apparent, a new employee joined the company. Hired mid-career, Maya seemed competent and was very beautiful. During her interview, Maya mentioned something concerning. I was harassed at my previous company. Apparently, she had resigned from her first job due to harassment, and even at her next job, she was teased about it, leading to more trouble. I was handling HR but had a medical checkup scheduled, so Theodore took over Maya's interview. Despite my reservations about her immediately bringing up past harassment, we decided it was unfortunate and that we should be considerate given Maya's tough experiences. Especially, Theodore seemed to take a liking to her, soon entrusting her with a supervisory role. Isn't it too soon for her to be in a higher position right after joining? It'll be fine. After all, unlike a fresh graduate, she has work experience. I still felt inexperienced, but I was beginning to sense some precariousness in Theodore's personnel management. However, Maya turned out to be quite a character. First off, she was incredibly rude. To be precise, her tone was polite, but her comments were harsh. For example, she didn't just correct mistakes made by newcomers or young employees. Her attacks, especially regarding educational background, were very harsh. "Oh dear, did your university teach you to make such mistakes, or is your alma mater a kindergarten?" "Oh sorry, it's just your intelligence that I'm sorry for." These were common mistakes that could be improved upon, but her demeaning remarks were severe. "Your parents must be sorry for raising such an incompetent person." She would insult someone's parents like this, a behavior unthinkable for a professional. Of course, I warned her, but she showed no remorse. "That's not a good way to speak. You shouldn't go as far as denying someone's character. Unfit personnel are just a waste for the company, right? I was just doing my duty as a senior." She'd just respond calmly like that. Maya, you're really harsh. What should we do?" "It's okay, she's still adjusting. Picking on the newbies isn't right." Theodore wouldn't take my advice seriously. Being pregnant, I couldn't meddle too much in company matters, but the atmosphere around Maya was deteriorating. Moreover, while she boasted about her own competence, others didn't see her as that outstanding. She was good at studying and memorizing, so she knew the business theory well but often failed to apply it practically. She also had a habit of neglecting to check her work, frequently resorting to copy-pasting. She'd submit work without making necessary changes, resulting in constant need for corrections. She didn't like this either and would come up with all sorts of excuses to justify herself. "I just worked efficiently. Maybe the way we do things here is just inefficient, don't you think?" "I understand your point, but this method is well established in our company. It's poor management from the bosses. It's not my fault I made mistakes, it was beyond my control. Besides, since you're pregnant, maybe you shouldn't come to the office so much." No matter how many times I addressed it, there was no improvement. Had Maya said something to Theodore? "Hey, Maya is a pitiful person. What if your words hurt her and she quits?" That's how he started blaming me. Moreover, Maya always bragged about buying expensive deli food at the department store. "I can't stand something as poor-looking as a cafeteria. It's smarter and a better use of time to eat out or occasionally cook with high-end ingredients at home." That's how she'd boast. I used to make Theodore lunches focused on vegetable dishes. But even that was ridiculed. Homestyle? The colors are dull, and it's 100 times better to just buy it. Poor CEO. Yeah, Maya's right. I, the CEO, shouldn't be eating stuff like this. Saying that, Theodore stopped taking the lunches I made. I hate to compare, but my father-in-law, who lives by the motto "keep unnecessary expenses down," still eats the lunch made by my mother-in-law, despite earning a lot of money. Thanks to that, our expenses on eating out and buying ready-made meals kept piling up, straining our finances. Since Maya joined, things between Theodore and me had been awkward. "You've put on a lot of weight recently. What happened to how you were before the pregnancy?" "It's just how my body reacts." Right, pregnant women can just laze around. Theodore would grimace during my pregnancy as I struggled with morning sickness and couldn't pay much attention to my figure or beauty. The in-laws were always kind to me, so it was hard to speak ill of their son, Theodore. Eventually, as the morning sickness started, it became difficult to continue working, and I stayed home. My parents suggested considering going back to my hometown to give birth, but Theodore was reluctant. "Why do something like that? Who's gonna take care of me while you're gone? You'll have to manage on your own. You just want to take it easy, but nobody around me does that. Going back to your hometown isn't the norm, you know." I wonder whose standards those statistics are based on. Theodore apparently also mentioned this to Maya. "Going back to your hometown for childbirth? Isn't that like being overly dependent on your wife? I can't respect a CEO's wife like that." That's the kind of email I got from Maya. Why do I have to be spoken to like this? The frustration just kept building day by day. Maya's condescension wasn't just towards her juniors, she was the same with older people. One day, before going back to my hometown, I went shopping for maternity goods and other items. There, I ran into McLaughlin. McLaughlin was there to buy envelopes and stationery. It was clear something was off, so when I asked, she said he was writing her resignation. McLaughlin too had been on the receiving end of Maya's repeated harassment. McLaughlin was a top graduate from a business high school, with specialized knowledge and accounting qualifications, ready for immediate action. That's why my father-in-law had scouted him and valued him greatly. Actually, McLaughlin is the most valuable employee at the company. Without her, the company would suffer significant damage. She had triplets to care for, so she never aimed for a high position. I don't know how Maya found out, whether she forced it out of her or discovered it somehow, but as soon as she learned McLaughlin was only a high school graduate, she started treating her disdainfully and forced greetings on her. McLaughlin is in a managerial role in a different department, but requests through her are blatantly ignored. When McLaughlin confronted Maya directly after getting angry, Maya said something outrageous. "Someone like you, just a defective high school grad, why should your work take priority? It's sad, really, the triplets being raised by someone like you." McLaughlin was naturally furious and confronted Maya. "My education has nothing to do with it. Why do you have to bring my children into this?" It was only right for her to be angry. But whether it was dissatisfaction or something else, Maya stirred up trouble with Theodore. "I was publicly condemned and harassed in front of everyone. I suffered emotional distress." Normally, one would scold Maya, but Theodore completely sided with her. "What's this about a veteran employee pressuring a newcomer? Just because you've been here a long time doesn't mean you can get cocky." In the end, the resolution was for McLaughlin to apologize to Maya. A little investigation would clearly show that Maya was at fault. Of course, Maya was smug about it. "Huh? Well, I'm generous enough to forgive someone like you. From now on, know your place." She didn't think she was in the wrong at all. She apologized, so I am in the right. And with that, she only became more oppressive. Being the CEO's favorite meant even the veterans were targeted, and nobody could say anything anymore. Maya's recklessness only worsened. She sent rude emails to business partners, making verification absolutely necessary. Her lengthy emails full of her own theories, or addressing important people at the partner company by their first names, were just some of the pre-professional problems piling up. But, I mean, if Maya's as pretty as she is, a few mistakes can be forgiven, right? CEO Theodore is so kind. Theodore would still say such melted things. That partner was quite a significant one, so later he was told to go and apologize along with the vice president, but Maya refused to accompany them. "Why do I have to go apologize? There's no need to humble myself that much." This was the tone with everything. So a few months after Maya joined, she was completely treated like a pariah. People would greet her and interact for work, but beyond that, no one touched anything. No matter how many times it was pointed out, she didn't follow the company-prescribed specifications, and when corrected, she'd say, "Being corrected by low-educated people like you is unpleasant, so don't." It seemed easier to just make corrections at the final stage without saying anything. I had no idea things had gotten to this point. "Camila, you must be having a hard time with the pregnancy, and it's hard to speak up. It's okay about me. But when she talks about my kids..." While talking, McLaughlin recalled Maya's words and looked even more pained. "I'm sorry for causing trouble. But once my child gets a job, maybe it's time for me to stop working so hard. Maybe retiring is an option." McLaughlin smiled considerately. "The resignation letter is just a precaution. I still have responsibilities, and it would be rude to quit abruptly. I'll try to keep going for a few more months. Please have a healthy baby." I was filled with remorse as I watched McLaughlin's back as she left. I protested to Theodore when I got home, but it was like talking to a wall. "You're not at the office right now, so you don't understand the situation. And you shouldn't be sticking your nose into this in the first place. But it's too much even for McLaughlin. We need to value our employees, right? That's why I'm taking care of Maya. Honestly, McLaughlin is getting older and her future contributions to the company won't be significant. Maybe it's time to think about a transition." Theodore left the house clearly in a bad mood. Lately, he's been staying out a lot, and something feels off. He's not helping at all with naming our child, and it feels like he's drifting further away from me. When I was in my final month of pregnancy, I noticed my toenail was split. My belly was in the way and I couldn't reach my feet, so I asked Theodore, who was in the living room, "My toenail has split and I can't cut it. Could you help me trim it?" Theodore's attitude changed completely. "Are you asking me to act like some kind of servant?" He slammed the newspaper on the floor, cleared everything off the table, and stormed out of the house. I wonder whose child he thinks I'm carrying. After all, I've even cut his nails before. This was definitely not good for the baby, so I decided to go back to my parents' home earlier than planned. When I told Theodore, his response was dismissive. All right, just leave already. You know, when the baby is born, you should come to the hospital, okay?" "Huh? I'm busy, you know." Doesn't he care that our child is about to be born? Isn't he looking forward to it? Despite his previous strong opposition to me going back to my hometown for the birth, he agreed to it quite easily this time, which felt odd. But I told myself that it's not uncommon for men to be slow to embrace fatherhood. After Theodore went to work, my father, who was looking forward to his grandchild's birth, came to pick me up. At my parents' home, I could relax under their care. My in-laws also kept in touch, maintaining a proper distance. However, there was hardly any contact from Theodore. Then, a month later, I gave birth in a large hospital. "This is our first child, right? I want you to be there. If you can't be inside, at least wait outside the delivery room." "I'm too busy with work." "You think a CEO can just run whenever his kid is born?" My parents and in-laws were furious and tried to reach him multiple times. But Theodore might have blocked their calls because he didn't show up for the birth of our baby. It was a girl, truly beautiful and angelic. But since we hadn't really discussed the name, I ended up naming her Mia. As I was settling in at my parents' home, taking care of Mia, a letter arrived from Theodore. Inside was a divorce petition. And a letter enclosed. "I got my mistress pregnant. We're getting a divorce, so don't come back." Accompanied by a photo of him making peace signs with a woman inside our house. The woman was Maya. My parents were furious, their faces red with rage. Despite the clear betrayal by Theodore, I felt oddly calm. Did his parents know about this? My parents and I immediately went to see my in-laws. "Oh my! Have you come to show us little Mia?" My in-laws welcomed us warmly. However, I had something difficult to share. I asked my mother to take care of Mia in another room while I showed the divorce papers and letter to my in-laws. My mother-in-law was speechless, and my father-in-law turned pale. "I had been thinking that Theodore was acting strange lately, but I never imagined it was this serious." "He's been quite irksome towards us too. I'm truly sorry, Camila. We must have gone wrong somewhere in raising him." It was truly painful to see my in-laws apologize. "Please stop. I didn't come here to make you do this." I hurriedly stopped my father-in-law and mother-in-law from apologizing. My father-in-law sighed deeply, looked at my mother-in-law, and muttered, "Should we take him down?" After reuniting with my in-laws, we decided to return to Theodore's house. They rang the doorbell with a fierce expression, and Theodore came out, startled. "What's going on? Why the sudden visit? How could you do this? Don't you feel any remorse towards Camila?" My father-in-law confronted Theodore as he overlaid his words. Theodore scratched his head irritably and clicked his tongue. "Don't snitch on me." He glared at me. Then, from behind, Maya appeared cheerfully asking, "Theodore, who is it?" As soon as she saw me, she almost burst out laughing. "What, the loser's wife? Did you sign the divorce papers? Why are you even here? Isn't it obvious? Theodore and I are starting a new life of love here. You've been dumped, so pack your things and leave quickly." How audacious could they be? My in-laws, further infuriated by their unrepentant attitude, stormed into the living room. Entering the living room, I was speechless. The place had been completely redecorated to their taste. Maternity goods with Maya's name were scattered everywhere, and their pictures adorned the shelves. It seemed they had completely taken over while I was away giving birth. The discussion that followed was fraught with their sullen defiance.
Theodore, Camila was working hard to give birth to your child. It was strange that you didn't even come to see the baby, and now this. You were lying to us. You prioritized your affair over important business meetings.
Theodore sulked, confronted by his elders.
Look, it's annoying when Camila gains weight from pregnancy and act all high and mighty about being a father. Maya, who respects me, is obviously better, right? I even started to find the baby unappealing. Being a father should come naturally, damn it.
My father-in-law shouted at him so loudly that Theodore jumped, and my mother-in-law slapped him, crying.
It's shameful. You also have a responsibility. You hardly look at Mia, but she's your child too.
Indeed, Theodore had barely glanced at Mia, let alone held her. Probably thinking Maya's child would be cuter.
That's annoying. She kept updating me about the ugly baby's growth like I should care. Trying to force me to feel like a dad was just off-putting, and I didn't want to hear about it when I got home from work. Why not just raise her quietly and praise me for not saying that? Yes, that's right. Theodore was troubled, you know? He's not interested in hearing about how the baby doesn't look cute in the ultrasound, or how much weight it's gained.
I felt like I was losing my mind. It was heartbreaking that Mia was despised by her father from birth.
You are unbelievable. When you see your wife unable to move because of her pregnancy, or your child who looks like they could be in danger any moment, you should feel a sense of urgency to protect them before even thinking about your role as a father. That's right. I won't recognize as my grandchild the child of someone who had an affair knowing you were married. The ones we care about are Camila and Mia only.
The two seemed as if they couldn't hear a word my in-laws were saying. Nothing more I say would likely make an impact. If that's the case, it's better to get the divorce over with quickly. I showed the alimony demand letter and made them sign it. Then, I submitted the divorce papers to the city hall.
Now that the divorce is finalized, why don't you just get married quickly? Oh, for an old lady, you sure know how to get things moving. How miserable, to be thrown out with a few $100,000 in alimony.
When we returned home, my in-laws declared they were cutting ties with the two of them. At that moment, their expressions changed drastically. Perhaps they were expecting to still be accepted.
Disowning your own son? Our kid is related by blood too. This baby will become better.
Maya glared at me. Her pride was likely soaring from having stolen Theodore from me. However, it was clear my in-laws cherished me, and she couldn't accept that. But the consequences for Theodore didn't stop there.
And you need to resign as CEO. What? Obviously, you're unfit to be CEO. You favor your affair partner and make everyone else suffer. Everyone knows it.
Theodore was at a loss for words. Perhaps realizing the truth.
But I am the CEO. Yes. You can't just fire him because you're his parents, right? Well, it would indeed be difficult to make him step down immediately without his willing to retire.
At his words, the two of them lifted their chins in triumph.
But can you really continue to run the company? What do you mean? I've secretly surveyed your employees. They said if you remain CEO, they'd quit. It was originally one of my companies, so they agreed to cooperate.
Theodore and Maya's mouths dropped open. If everyone quits simultaneously, the company would immediately become inoperable.
Stop threatening me, Dad. They can't find another job that easily. I've promised to hire them if I create a new department in my company. It seems they really hated the current situation. Everyone was quite pleased. What? They betrayed us.
The two were screaming wildly, their faces turning a fiery red. However, cornered by the father-in-law's meticulous preparation, Theodore agreed to step down as CEO.
But you'll at least make me an officer, right? We can't live if you don't. Don't tell me to go back to being a regular employee. Right, Maya. Maya can become the next CEO.
Sorry, but the next CEO has already been decided. Theodore was taken aback by his father-in-law's assertive attitude.
Who is it?
It's McLaughlin. She's the most veteran, and Camila will support her in the CEO task. You don't have to worry at all. You won't be a regular employee. You're fired. Upon hearing that McLaughlin was the successor, Maya's mouth dropped open, and after a while, she began to throw a tantrum.
Why her? How can a mere high school grad become CEO?
Don't speak rudely. McLaughlin has been cleaning up your messes at work. Oh, and unfortunately, due to compliance issues, we've accumulated too many complaints to employ you any longer.
No, that's not right.
Maya began tearing at her hair.
It's all because everyone badmouths me. They're just jealous of my superior education. You believe those baseless, malicious rumors about me.
It was a state of complete confusion. Maya continued to shriek disgracefully. Actually, I had reported the current state of the company to my in-laws right after parting with McLaughlin. My father-in-law had been staying out of company affairs, thinking it best for Theodore. However, upon learning about McLaughlin's situation, Maya's tyranny, and Theodore's negligence, he immediately contacted McLaughlin. He apologized to McLaughlin for his son and wife's rudeness and made her an offer to be the next president, which she accepted, albeit surprised. And one more thing.
Are you really the graduate you claim to be on your resume?
Maya had practically been hired because Theodore was smitten with her at the interview. As it turns out, no background check was conducted on Maya. If we were to believe Maya's own claims, she supposedly attended a prestigious university, ranking highly enough to be announced. Her parents and relatives had impressive careers and were quite wealthy. Maya often boasted about this, though curiously never showed any gratitude towards her parents. With the salary of someone at her age and position, she owned several luxury watches that were clearly mismatched in value and frequently replaced expensive appliances, living alone in a high-end apartment in a convenient location. She lived a socially enviable, affluent life. It was puzzling why such a person would bother working for us. I get bored staying at home, she had said as her reason. I had seen other wealthy people who got along well with their in-laws. They were all calm individuals. The rich do not quarrel. This proverb seemed true enough. That someone from that background could become so aggressive and so full of a victim mentality, blaming others, was indicative of poor upbringing.
I'm sorry, but I had to check. It turns out you did attend that university, but you were expelled midway through. What? For plagiarism in your reports and thesis. And other misconducts, it seems. It didn't take long to find out.
Maya bit her lip and looked down. Theodore stood up and began to berate Maya.
So, you lied to me? Is that why you never invited me to your home? What? I approached you because you were the CEO, and now this mess happens.
Maya's parents are fairly wealthy. Despite their disapproval of her academic dishonesty and dropping out of university, they hoped that throwing her into the working world might straighten her out. Yet, her tyrannical behavior led to her dismissal from her job, causing significant financial losses for the company, which resulted in her parents giving her a severance payment and kicking her out of the house. It was enough money to live a lavish lifestyle for a while, but there was no way Maya could lower her standard of living. Eventually, her savings ran out, and she even started accruing debt. That's when she set her sights on Theodore, a young CEO, intending to secure her position by having his child, based on the fact of their relationship. Her disregard for others in the company stemmed from her belief that they would all eventually be her subordinates, using her uncompleted university degree as a reason to look down on them. Losing the presidency to McLaughlin must have been an unbearable humiliation for her. When I heard that her claims of being harassed at her previous job were just a preemptive strike and a strategy to gain sympathy during her interview, I must have looked as if I were staring at an alien.
So, I lost the company because of you. And that kid of yours must be a lie too. No, this really is your child.
They started an ugly fight despite both being about to become parents. When I was pregnant and feeling ill, Theodore was having an affair and mocking me. This situation was entirely of their own making. My in-laws suggested they would kick Theodore and Maya out and told me to stay at the house, but I refused. After struggling with morning sickness and desperately preparing the house for the baby, I couldn't bear to return to a home filled with Theodore and Maya's wedding photos and their lovey-dovey selfies. Theodore and Maya eventually left the company. As expected, their married life was reportedly not going well. Theodore was probably hoping for financial support from the company or his father-in-law, as his own savings were minimal.
How can you just disown me like that? Do Dad and Mom hate me that much? You abandoned Camila and Mia. If you want help, you should start by apologizing to Camila. Why should I apologize to her? I definitely won't.
Theodore, stubborn to the end, used his connections to start working at another company. However, accustomed to being a top executive, he struggled to fit in. For example, he would leave meetings abruptly and not return, going straight home.
He said his explanation was so boring that it wasn't worth my time. I was a CEO, so I know these things.
Theodore would say, unapologetically, even when reprimanded. And there were worse mishaps. He once accepted a delivery from a vendor but forgot to pass the invoice to accounting.
I sent the invoice well before this month's payment deadline, didn't I?
Pressed by the vendor, he finally checked and discovered the paperwork error. And she responded to this fact without any remorse.
I completely forgot to send it to accounting. The payment will be next month. That's a problem. It's been a month and a half since I submitted it. It's your mistake. Please handle it urgently. So, I just sent it to accounting, and even though it should be the month after next, I've asked them to make it next month as a special favor. Isn't this a bit too persistent?
Apparently, Theodore snapped at a perfectly reasonable request from the vendor, speaking as if he was the victim. Naturally, the vendor was furious.
How can you excuse your own mistakes like that? You are not fit for this discussion. I'd rather talk to your boss instead. What? Why would you say that about my work? Hey! Are you even aware of the inconvenience you're causing? It's because you have no sense of responsibility that I'm saying someone else should take over. Enough already.
Theodore was scolded and had completely become disillusioned with his job. Furthermore, Theodore had irritated his typically mild-mannered clients to the point of anger, making him a nuisance in the company.
I'm an adult and yet they speak to me as just hey. That's unbelievable.
Normally, this would have been a sobering situation, but Theodore was unrepentant and ended up being fired. Naturally, this cut off his source of income, and with constant quarrels with Maya, Theodore hopped from job to job. He kept asking his in-laws for financial help, but they continually refused. A year later, I was raising Mia, watched over by my parents and in-laws. One day, as I stepped outside the house holding Mia, I saw a man standing there. As I noticed him staring intently at us, I continued to soothe Mia, when suddenly he began to sob, covering his mouth.
What's wrong?
The man suddenly approached and tried to touch Mia. I instinctively stepped back and then recognized it was Theodore, looking emaciated and as if he hadn't been living well.
Theodore! You've raised Mia to be so big, were you waiting for me?
He was making no sense. Just as Theodore reached out towards us, my father, seeing this, ran towards us with a shovel.
Why are you here? Get out! Wait! I came to pick up Camila.
Theodore claimed his marriage was a mess. Maya had given birth, but they were broke and living in poverty. After a DNA test confirmed the baby was indeed Theodore's, debt collectors began to harass them, making life difficult. When Maya tried to return to her old company, McLaughlin personally turned her away. Seeing the company thriving and harmonious without her, she had a meltdown.
Why? I deserve to be in charge. Please leave, you're causing a disturbance. Your seat here is no longer available.
McLaughlin said calmly as security escorted a stomping Maya away. Theodore and Maya's relationship had soured, and Theodore wanted to leave Maya and the baby and come back.
She used to be so beautiful, and now with her messy hair, I can't stand to look at her. Come on, Camila, come back to my house. If you're there, we can kick Maya out.
What are you talking about? To think of abandoning your new family as well, you really haven't changed at all. I will never let Mia meet you. Stay away from us. Theodore looked desperate. You've become just like your mother, completely losing the innocence you once had. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. My father, threatening with the shovel, seemed to frighten Theodore enough to make him flee. I'm sorry, our foolish son has. I talked to my in-laws, who apologized and then agreed to install security to ensure our safety. If he lurks around again, I won't hold back. Although I doubt I'll have anything to do with Theodore and Maya again, their intense personalities haunted my dreams during tough times. I want that to be the last of it. In my arms, Mia slept peacefully. Even without a father, she has the strong support of both grandparents. She will definitely be happy. Above all, I am determined to live positively for the sake of this little life before me. What the heck? That's one ugly bride. I'd love to see what her parents look like. These were the first words my in-laws said upon seeing my face, making me involuntarily exclaim, huh? I had a bad feeling about visiting my in-laws' house from the start. I pretended not to notice the slim chances that David's parents would be reasonable people, and I had come this far. But hearing these insulting words about me now, I'm reminded how foolish I was. Well, you see it, right? I was shocked too when I first met her. She said she felt complex about her looks, but I never imagined it'd be this bad. Even David said something unbelievable. Could it be that David had been mocking my appearance from the beginning? Thinking this, I felt so frustrated I could scream. There's no way I can go through with marrying David without saying something. I need to change this situation somehow. With determination in my heart, I quietly slipped my hand into my pocket, ready to take action. My name is Linda Miller. I'm 30 years old and work as a public relations officer at a major food company. Honestly, the path to get here wasn't easy. I almost gave up many times, but I finally made it. Even now, thinking back makes me tear up. Ever since I was little, I've been called ugly by my classmates. With a small nose, single eyelids, thick lips, and freckles all over my cheeks, I'm far from being called beautiful. Now, it may seem like a minor thing in life. But society still judges people by their looks, and it was only natural that I developed a complex about my appearance. During school, I grew my bangs long to avoid eye contact and walked around looking down all the time. The dark aura I emitted made it understandable why my classmates used me as their stress relief. Being called ugly or gloomy was the lesser of the evils. At worst, my shoes were hidden or my gym clothes were torn to pieces, so it's no wonder my spirit was crushed. In high school, I decided to change myself and studied relentlessly. Even though I was still bad-mouthed in high school, I didn't care and kept my focus forward. Thanks to that, I got into a top private university and landed a job at a well-known food manufacturer that everyone knows. It's been 2 years since I started working in the PR department. I've recently started using a dating app and have a date with a man this weekend. What kind of man will he be? How will he react to my looks? It's a bit scary, but if possible, I'd like to try dating too. Until now, I've lived thinking I could never date because of my complex about my appearance. But maybe this time, I can move forward. That's why I decided to take this step. The weekend I had arranged to meet a man through a dating app had arrived. I dressed up as best as I could, applying my makeup more meticulously than usual. I spotted the man I was supposed to meet at our rendezvous point and mustered the courage to approach him. His name on the app was David, so I tentatively asked, "Are you David?" "Oh, are you Linda?" "Nice to meet you, I'm David." David recognized me and greeted me with a big smile. Nice to meet you, please take care of me. First and foremost, I was relieved that David didn't recoil at my appearance, so his smile was very comforting. I've got a reservation at a restaurant, shall we go? David, seemingly accustomed to such meetings, led the way to the restaurant with confidence and without any hesitation. I was still nervous about meeting someone new, and I followed David, watching his back as we walked. At the restaurant, we each ordered something we liked. My real name is David Taylor. I work as the sales director, Chain Corporation, an auto parts manufacturer. Oh, and I'm the sales director at this young age because my dad is the president. David casually mentioned something incredible during his introduction. Just hearing the word auto parts manufacturer made my heart skip a beat. Since Chain Corporation is a well-known company to anyone. That the president of Chain Corporation was David's father was significant. His app profile mentioned his income, but I hadn't imagined he was the sales director at Chain Corporation. Wow, the sales director at the famous Chain Corporation? That's impressive. My name is Linda Miller, and I work in public relations at New Wave Company, a food company. When I introduced myself similarly, David reacted with exaggerated surprise.
Really? Well, that's impressive too.
I wasn't sure how genuine he was, but being praised for the position I worked hard to achieve was genuinely pleasing. No, I'm nothing special. You're more impressive. When I praised David, he smiled happily again. After that, we talked a lot about our hobbies and had a great time. David was the kind of person who made even the dullest stories enjoyable, nodding exaggeratedly and asking questions, making it easy to talk to him. He didn't seem put off by my appearance at all. After talking for about an hour, I found myself thinking that I might be able to, perhaps move forward with him. Actually, I have always been complex about my looks. As the atmosphere warmed up, I decided to share my complex with David. David looked at me intently and then expressed genuine curiosity. Is that so? I don't think you need to feel that way. You seem to be working hard on yourself. Oh, sorry if that sounded presumptuous. David's words eased into my heart and melted it. No, thank you. I felt my heart warming up. I felt confident that I could make it work with David. Acting on intuition, I confessed to David on our second date. David, not expecting me to make the first move, initially looked surprised but then said shyly, I was about to say the same, which was very endearing. Our relationship seemed to progress smoothly. David continued to treat me kindly even after we started dating. I realized that I had a habit of unconsciously bragging about my wealthy family, but David was willing to be in a serious relationship with me, someone who's not exactly cute, so I could overlook that minor flaw. It was on our one-year anniversary that David proposed, saying, "Let's get married." I was shocked, having not expected a proposal so soon. But I had hoped to eventually be with David, so I happily accepted.
Thank you. I'm so happy I met you, Linda. I'm really happy too.
At that moment, I felt on top of the world, truly happy with David's proposal. It might have been the peak of my happiness. Because from that day, David's behavior towards me began to change dramatically. I hadn't realized it yet. The month after our engagement, we decided to move in together. David quickly bought a condo in a high-rise, and we began living there even before our marriage. Is it okay to live in such a nice place? Aren't the mortgage payments tough? Oh, the mortgage is fine. My family is rich. But in return, you'll need to handle all the household chores. I'll be coming home around 10 p.m. on weekdays, so I won't have time. Your company is pretty lenient, right? So, I'll leave the household stuff to you. David rattled this off in our new apartment. I was suddenly burdened with all the housework, and I was completely stunned. Moreover, his tone seemed sharper than usual. Usually, he spoke to me gently, never like now, quickly making demands. Half bewildered, I nodded, thinking, well, he's the future successor of Chain Corporation, so I guess he's busy. But a thorn-like feeling was already pricking at my heart. From that day, David's attitude changed rapidly. First, he would check every corner of the apartment as soon as he woke up. He couldn't stand any dirtiness, and if he found even a speck of dust, he'd lash out, "Hey, what's this dust? You skipped cleaning yesterday, didn't you?" I was dumbstruck and couldn't respond. I had vacuumed and wiped down the place just yesterday. There might be a bit of dust left. But there was David, glaring at me furiously. "Really, you're useless. I thought you'd make a great housekeeper at least." "Well, there's plenty of time for you to improve your skills." "What?" As I voiced my confusion, David quickly left for work. What was all this about? The kind David I knew was treating me like just a housekeeper. I felt a stir of turmoil in the depths of my heart, and I couldn't focus at work all day. Moreover, if I didn't have dinner ready and served by the time he came home, he would start yelling. Even trivial things he could do himself, he wouldn't be satisfied unless I did them. Even though my company is lenient, I often don't get home until about 7 p.m. After preparing meals and doing other chores, naturally, I had no time left for myself. Is this cohabitation really okay? A whirl of doubts in my mind turned into waves of great anxiety pressing on my heart. Maybe I had drawn a really bad lot after all. I finally realized how foolish I had been. But contrary to my feelings, David was steadily preparing for our marriage. One Friday night, David came home earlier than usual but still didn't help with the chores, instead telling me, "We're going to my parents' house this Sunday to announce our engagement." What? We had only been engaged for a month, so I was surprised. Typically, the woman's family is visited first for marriage introductions. Yet here we were, suddenly preparing to visit David's family, and I wasn't ready. Shouldn't we visit my parents first? You know, it's customary to visit the woman's family first, right? I tried to persuade David with this argument. However, he seemed unbothered and responded, "What? It doesn't matter. We're going to visit your family eventually anyway." But David's forceful approach left me with a flicker of unease. What would my parents think if they knew we visited his parents first? Would they trust a man who didn't respect the custom of visiting the bride's family first? Ignoring my concerns, David began to outline what to keep in mind during the visit. "My parents are strict, so don't mess up. Also, you'll quit your job after we marry because they believe a wife should not work if she isn't capable of managing household duties properly." David informed me as if it were obvious. This shocked me, and I asked, "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. Linda, you'll quit your job and become a homemaker. Lucky you, being with a rich son like me. You'll have an easy life," David said with a mocking smile. I was taken aback by this sudden demand. I haven't agreed to quit my job. I like my work, remember? I told you that when we met. I intend to keep working even after we're married. Determined not to be dictated to about my career, I confronted David with my true feelings. However, he took my protests lightly, responding with nonchalant nods, yeah. Whatever you say, but this is already decided." Too bad. David grabbed a bottle of sake from the table, poured himself a drink, and started sipping it with a flushed face. I realized then that arguing with David now was futile. If I married David, I would be forced to quit my job. This fact cast a dark shadow over my heart. With my unease unresolved, 2 days passed, and Sunday morning arrived. Reluctantly, I slipped into the black dress I had prepared. I applied makeup carefully enough to avoid looking unattractive, hoping the first impression would be decent. It would be the first time meeting my in-laws. Though I had heard they were strict, I hoped they would be more reasonable than David. I even wished they would stop David from forcing me to quit my job. David was humming tunes from the morning, eagerly preparing to leave. It seemed he was more excited about seeing his parents' reaction to me than introducing me to them. After getting ready, we immediately headed to David's parents' house. It was only 2 train stops away from our apartment, very close indeed. I wished I had more time to mentally prepare, but cruelly, the train reached our destination in just a few minutes. A 10-minute walk from the nearest station, David's parents' house stood impressively. It really looked like a small castle, and seeing it made me swallow hard. This house cost $1 million. Impressive, right? David boasted, puffing out his chest as he energetically opened the front door and entered, saying, "I'm home." I followed him inside and timidly said, "Excuse me for intruding." His parents were waiting in the living room and smiled at David, saying, "Welcome back." Then they turned to me and scrutinized me from head to toe as if appraising my worth. "What's this?" "Quite an unattractive bride. I'd love to see what her parents look like." These were the first words David's parents said upon seeing me, and I couldn't help but exclaim, "What?" I had a bad feeling about this visit from the start. I had ignored the low likelihood that David's parents would be reasonable. But hearing these words of insult directed at me made me realize how foolish I had been. Right? I was shocked too when I first met her. She said she was self-conscious about her looks, but I never thought it'd be this bad. David unbelievably added. Was it possible that David had been mocking my appearance from the beginning? The kind responses he had given me when I first confessed my insecurities about my appearance were all lies. Thinking this, I felt so angry I could burst. There was no way I could go through with marrying David without saying something. I need to change this situation somehow. Determined, I quietly slipped my hand into my pocket and prepared to take a certain action. "May I use the restroom?" I asked his parents, who dismissively waved me away as if shooing a stray dog, saying, "Go ahead, quickly." Feeling humiliated, I stepped out into the hallway and headed towards what I assumed was the bathroom, pulling out my phone from my pocket. I called someone. She listened to my situation sympathetically, and I felt relieved after the call. After ending the call, I turned on the voice recorder on my phone and returned to the living room nonchalantly. Upon my return, David's parents insulted me again. "Where did you find such a woman? It's a shame. We were looking forward to meeting David's bride-to-be. She has to be introduced at the company, too. They'll make fun of her," his mother said with a smirk, covering her mouth with her hand, though her eyes weren't smiling. To them, I was merely the wife of the heir to the auto parts manufacturer, Company C. No doubt, introducing someone unattractive like me as their daughter-in-law was displeasing to them. Come on, that's a bit harsh. It doesn't matter what she looks like, you guys told me to catch someone useful. Besides, I plan to have Linda quit her job after we marry. She's really lucky, being with a rich guy like me. Is that so? But now that I think about it, appearances do matter. After all, she's going to be the face of our company. And with that face. At David's father's words, his mother let out a crude laugh. Who could have imagined being insulted to this extent? Tears welled up in my eyes as I listened to their complaints. "Oh, please, come quickly, come quickly." As I silently wished this, the doorbell at David's house rang simultaneously. "Who is that? Did you order a delivery?" "Delivery? I haven't ordered anything recently." "Then who is it?" "Go check it out." Urged by his father, David went to the door and opened it. I heard David's voice asking, "Who are you?" followed by a confident, fearless reply, as someone entered the house. "Hey, you can't just..." David tried to stop the person, but they walked confidently into the living room. I saw the face of the newcomer and let out a sigh of relief. It was my mother, who had come right after I called her. "Hello, I'm the unattractive bride's mother," she said with a smile, greeting them without showing any anger, though I could tell she was very upset. "Oh, you are." David's parents' faces stiffened upon seeing my mother. "What's going on? Why is Linda's mother here suddenly, and why do you two look so shocked?" David was the only one confused by my mother's unexpected arrival. But the reason David's parents were frozen was not just because my mother had shown up unannounced, but because they recognized who she was. "What? Why? Is this some kind of prank?" David's parents' tone became slightly more polite, perhaps out of nervousness. "This is no prank. my mother replied calmly in front of the flustered in-laws. I rushed over because I heard that my daughter and her fiancé's parents were insulting her. And wasn't it you who said you wanted to see the bride's parents? Perhaps sensing the anger underlying her calm tone, David's parents gasped in shock. What's going on here, Linda? David, unable to follow the conversation, turned to me for clarification. To him, it must have seemed like my mother just showed up and his parents were merely surprised by her appearance. I took a deep breath and decided to reveal the truth. Oh, you're meeting her for the first time? This is my mother, the CEO of auto manufacturer Alameda. I said it firmly, and David's face turned pale as he muttered, auto manufacturer Alameda? Could it be? It seemed David finally grasped the situation. My mother's company is a major client of David's father's company. For them, she is their biggest client. My mother was celebrated as a beautiful CEO. She had appeared on television several times, so many would recognize her as the CEO of Alameda Auto. Despite David working at his father's company, he hadn't recognized that the CEO of Alameda Auto was my mother. What? A's CEO is Linda's mother? That can't be, she doesn't look like you at all. I get it, this must be some strategy to surprise us, right? Why would you go to the trouble of having the CEO come here? A flustered David accused me of lying. While dumbfounded, I sighed and answered. I don't have such connections. This woman truly is my mother. I take after my father. Don't you think you judge people too much by their appearance? Seriously? David and his parents, who had been relentlessly calling me unattractive, probably never imagined my mother would be so beautiful. Moreover, once they realized she was the CEO of a major client, their attitudes suddenly became extremely deferential. How funny. To think that the CEO of Alameda Auto was Ms. Linda's mother. Had we known, we would have welcomed you properly from the start. That's right. We never intended to fight with you. Although it's late, please have a seat. My wife will make some tea for you right now. David's parents, who suddenly became very formal, urged my mother and me to sit on a luxurious sofa. However, my mother did not budge from her spot. Smiling pleasantly, she said, "Thank you, but I prefer standing." Her calm tone and smiling face somehow gave David and his parents an indescribable sense of dread. Their bodies visibly began to shake. Furthermore, I have nothing to discuss with you. We've decided to end our business with your company as of today. My mother's demeanor tightened, taking on the protective stance of a parent. Her announcement to end the business relationship shocked everyone present, including me. End the business relationship? Please, don't say that. We hope to continue our partnership. That's right. Your company will surely suffer without our business, won't it? The three of them frantically attempted to negotiate. But my mother's expression only grew more severe. Finally, she dropped her pleasant facade and spoke in a lower voice. No, the decision to stop business is final. I no longer wish to associate with people who belittle my daughter as unattractive or worse. We did not mean to belittle her. Come on, don't say such outrageous things. David and his mother protested, their arguments sounding incredibly insincere to me. I stepped forward, addressing David and his parents boldly. Unfortunately, I have evidence here that you've been mocking me. Evidence? David's father looked puzzled, tilting his head. I made sure he saw as I pulled out my smartphone from my pocket. Then, I started playing the voice recorder audio that I had recorded earlier in their home. Upon hearing their own disparaging voices, the three of them looked at me in utter disbelief. What does this mean? David shouted at me. It means exactly what you've heard. Since you've been mocking me and my mother, I could not just stay silent and marry into your family. I am calling off our engagement. What? David was clearly not expecting me to break off our engagement. He was visibly shocked and lost his balance. It's too late for that now. You're supposed to marry into our family. Yes, that's right. It's very fortunate for us to have the daughter of the CEO of Alameda Auto as our daughter-in-law. Our future is secure." His mother suddenly switched to a more cheerful demeanor, as if trying to embrace the situation. Disgusted by their inability to understand, I refuted my mother-in-law's words. "No. As I said before, I will not marry David. I don't want to become family with people who belittle me. If you don't accept the cancellation of our engagement and the termination of business with your company, I will upload the recording to the internet. I'm sure that would send your credibility and stock prices plummeting." My calm but angry statement turned their faces pale. "Please, don't do that. If we goes under, our family will be lost." "Yeah, that would be a disaster." His parents chimed in, imagining a future where company C collapses, starting to tremble. "So, will you agree to cancel the engagement and the business deal?" I pressed David further. He stuttered again, that's still seemingly trying to resist. Even now, at this point, was he still trying to put up some fight? I sighed heavily in frustration. "What's with your indecisive attitude?" "The main reason I want to call off our engagement is because you ridiculed my appearance. And now, knowing your company might be in jeopardy, you beg pathetically. Don't you have anything to say to me? And to you, my in-laws, judging people by their looks, I don't want to be part of a family like that. I'm especially disgusted by how quickly you changed your tune once you found out my mother is the CEO of Alameda Auto. I will definitely not marry David." Having my mother's support allowed me to vent my feelings openly. David and his parents could only stare as I spoke. "Sorry, my bad. But think about it, marrying a rich guy like me would make your life easier, right?" David's last plea seemed to assume I was only interested in money. I clenched my fist and shouted back. "Unfortunately, I'm not interested in money. My mother runs her company, and I have a respectable job myself. I don't need more money. I'd rather find someone who truly values me. Don't ever contact me again. Goodbye." With that, I turned on my heel and left David's house with my mother. We ignored his cries of "please don't spread the recording." What I do with that recording is my prerogative. I never want to see David's face again. My mother and I exchanged looks and sighed in relief. As I declared, I ended the engagement with David. It turned out he had been dating to quickly get married. He thought an unattractive woman like me would be easy to convince. He was just looking for a convenient woman to do housework, making me a perfect target. But unfortunately for David, I was not the person he thought I was. I take pride in my work and have no intention of marrying just to be demeaned. Thus, his plan miserably failed. My mother indeed ended the business with David's father's company. Without a major client like ours, it saw its management deteriorate. Public trust plummeted, and the stock prices dropped significantly. Moreover, it was discovered that my mother-in-law had been embezzling company funds. She thought a little here and there wouldn't matter, but over the years, those little bits accumulated into a sum too significant to ignore. Now, with the business situation worsening, the amount of money my mother-in-law had embezzled was putting immense pressure on the company. But that's not all. David and his father had always treated their subordinates poorly. With the deteriorating management, employee dissatisfaction exploded, leading to a wave of resignations. Ultimately, with their future in jeopardy, David quickly sought refuge by moving to another company. It was almost a family-run business, likely aiming to prevent a collective collapse. However, David's condescending attitude was quickly spotted by interviewers at other companies, and he struggled to find employment. In the meantime, their company continued its decline, and there was no position left for David to return to. Now, still burdened with the mortgage payments for our former high-rise condo, David is probably scrambling to make ends meet with part-time jobs. I never needed to release that recording situation to deteriorate this far. The significant impact of Alameda Auto's withdrawal and the cost of angering my mother became starkly evident. While it's unfortunate for David, he essentially reaped what he sowed. I can't help but think he deserves to suffer for his actions. As for myself, I decided to undergo cosmetic surgery. It was a bit scary, but inspired by stories of actresses who transformed beautifully through surgery, frequently discussed in the media, I took the plunge. After the surgery, I hardly recognized myself. I thought I looked as pretty as my mother did in her youth. With this new face, I feel more vibrant than ever. At work, a male colleague from the sales department has even asked me out for drinks. I don't know what the future holds, but with a fresh start and a new me, I'm ready to give my all to both my career and my love life. 5 years ago, my 13-year-old daughter's pregnancy was discovered, and right before my eyes, my husband and daughter committed suicide together. Until then, we had a happy life. My marriage was solid, and we had a lovely daughter. Everything seemed perfect. The only blemish on my life was my brother-in-law, Dan, who would barge into our house and make a mess drinking.
"Mom, what should I do? I think I'm pregnant."
With those words from my daughter, our life was turned upside down.
"I heard about it. What have you done? The whole neighborhood is talking. It's made things awkward for me and my parents. It's because you, her mother, didn't educate her properly. That's why this happened."
Dan, acting as if he owned the place, yelled and screamed. My husband, daughter, and I were all worn out, and eventually, what we feared would happen did happen.
"What are you doing? Stop them quickly."
My husband and daughter's car plummeted off a cliff. They were gone, out of reach.
"It's your fault. Why weren't you watching them? Give me back my brother and niece."
To think you'd abandon your husband and daughter, you're incredibly cold-hearted. Broken by the accusations, I was forced to live like a slave to my in-laws and Dan. 5 years later. After finding my husband's will, I decided to seek revenge. I would make sure they paid for what they had done. My husband also loved to drink. You brothers used to drink together often, didn't you?
"Yes, that's right. It was the greatest pleasure of my life. But it's impossible now, thanks to you."
Then, suddenly, my husband and daughter appeared on the balcony and began to reveal a shocking truth. I'm Ava, a 40-year-old. I live with my husband, Chris, and our daughter, Emily, making us a family of 3. Emily is reaching that costly age of 13, so I've taken a part-time office job to help out, though my earnings are just a drop in the bucket, and we mainly rely on Chris's income. Emily and I get along great, and she even comes to me with her problems. Chris and I have a strong marriage too. He has a bit of a problem with drinking. He gets loud and loses himself in it, but it's never been enough to make me lose affection for him, just something that occasionally frustrates me. I do what I can for our family, and Chris works hard every day. Emily is diligent with her studies and extracurricular activities and is well regarded at school. Though there are minor annoyances in daily life, I believed we could face anything as a family. That was until that incident occurred. I couldn't have imagined my life, my family, being thrown into such disarray. It was around the time I heard that Dan, Chris's brother, had gotten divorced that he started showing up at our house all the time. I wasn't told why he got divorced, but given his arrogant and rough demeanor, it seemed like a natural outcome. Dan always brought alcohol with him, knowing Chris, who's timid and also enjoys his drink, couldn't turn him away. Every time Dan came without notice, I prepared snacks for both of them and took care of my husband, who laughed loudly, and his brother, whose behavior was overbearing whether he had drunk or not. I have to work tomorrow. This isn't relaxing at all. Watching my husband and Dan drink and have a good time together, completely disregarding how I felt, deeply disappointed me. They both act so similarly when drunk, which only adds to my fatigue. Hey, honey, about your brother. Could he maybe visit a bit less? It's hard for me when he comes over on weekdays or Sundays since I have work the next day. Yeah, you're right. I do feel bad about it, but I just can't seem to say no. I think he's just lonely. When my husband, who usually considers my feelings first, said that, I felt unable to say anything more. I often sighed, wondering how long this way of living would last.
Hey, we're out of snacks. What a thoughtless wife. Bring some more.
I wanted to scream, "I'm not your wife," but I restrained myself and brought some simple snacks. My husband gave me an apologetic look but never cautioned Dan. But I supposed it was inevitable. My in-laws have always clearly favored Dan over Chris, spoiling him. It seems to be some form of brainwashing, given their family history, so it's no surprise Chris can't stand up to Dan. I told myself to be patient, to endure. Dan's overbearing and aggressive nature led me to instruct Emily to stay in her room whenever he visited. She seems to dislike Dan too, hiding in her room whenever he's around.
Emily isn't coming out? She has a relative over, and she's being so rude. Doesn't she have any manners? Weren't you supposed to teach her better?
Even when my daughter was insulted, my husband and I just gave a vague smile and let it slide. It's better than letting our precious daughter meet this man.
You're my brother, but you have no eye for women. What do you see in such a plain and inattentive woman? A man should marry a more beautiful and attentive woman. Come on, Dan. Let's just drink the alcohol you brought. Running away to alcohol again. That's another one of your flaws. Maybe so.
My husband, who loves to drink, seemed less and less inclined to drink with his brother, and with each passing occasion, he became less intoxicated than usual. Seeing us treated this way, my daughter would sometimes help with chores the next day, as if to comfort us. Despite enduring such unbearable treatment, we couldn't resist. Feeling pathetic for making my daughter worry, I thought of cutting ties with them someday. The problem was my husband's feelings. Having been oppressed and brainwashed from a young age, he seemed unable to make the decision to cut ties with his family. My parents died early, and I have no siblings, so I can't understand his feelings. Therefore, until my husband's resolve is firm, we decided as a family to endure quietly. One day, out of the blue, a new troublemaker appeared in our lives, aside from my brother-in-law.
Mom, what should I do? I think I'm pregnant.
At first, I didn't understand what was being said. Gradually, as I comprehended the meaning, I nearly raised my voice in agitation, but the anxious look on my daughter's face helped me hold back.
Is that true?
Yes. I took a test. My daughter looked like she was on the verge of tears. I gently patted her shoulder, trying to soothe her.
Just to be sure, let's test again. I'll go buy a test.
Ultimately, my daughter's pregnancy was confirmed. No matter how we asked who the father was, my daughter firmly kept her lips sealed. Whether I asked, or my husband did, it was the same. After hours of family discussion, we came to a conclusion. Taking into account my daughter's opinion, I believe we were able to reach a consensus that satisfied everyone. It was a relief to have discovered my daughter's pregnancy early. This way, we could still manage the situation. But just when we had found some peace, hearing the news, my brother-in-law barged into our house and began to berate us.
I heard about it. What have you done? The whole neighborhood is talking. It's made things awkward for me and my parents. It's because you, her mother, didn't educate her properly. That's why this happened. Please stop yelling. My daughter is frightened.
Seeing me finally retort, my brother-in-law smirked as if he found me ridiculous.
Playing the mother now? It's all too late.
After causing a commotion, my brother-in-law left the house. The next day, a call came from my in-laws, who showered my husband with similar reproaches. Even as we tried to navigate this crisis, it felt like those around us were dragging us down. To mask my anxiety, I held my daughter tightly. With my husband busy at work, the responsibility of caring for our daughter fell primarily on me. If there was time, my husband came with us, but essentially, I was the one handling everything.
Oh, someone's calling me. Go ahead without me.
On our way back from the hospital as a family of 3, I received a call from my daughter's teacher. It was a call to inquire about my daughter's well-being, but given the complex situation, it inevitably turned into a lengthy conversation.
What are you doing? Stop them quickly.
I was startled when my brother-in-law appeared as I was heading back to the car after the call. Confused by his shouting, I looked in the direction he pointed. My husband's car was driving straight toward a cliff.
Stop! Please stop!
My frantic screams were futile. The car didn't stop. Trying to catch up on foot was hopeless. The car crossed the fence much quicker.
Oh!
As if mocking my desperate reach, the car slipped down the cliff. Rushing to follow, I was restrained by hospital staff.
Calm down, please! Someone, call the rescue team and the police!
As I broke down crying, my brother-in-law glared at my back.
It's your fault. Why weren't you watching them? Give me back my brother and niece.
Even though I had always gritted my teeth and endured, now his voice pierced through my heart. The stares and voices of my in-laws also disturbed the calm of my heart.
What kind of person are you? To think you'd abandon your husband and daughter, you're incredibly cold-hearted.
With Chris and Emily gone, I lost the pillars of my heart. Moreover, being berated in such a manner made me indifferent towards life, and for the next 5 years, I lived as if a slave, toiling away at the behest of these people. After 5 years, I was utterly exhausted. Why did you leave me alone? The marriage ring, now loose due to my weight loss, slipped through my fingers as I fiddled with it. I had been told by my in-laws and Dan to sell the house, but I desperately refused because it held precious family memories. Now, this house was my only sanctuary. Especially in the bedroom I shared with Chris, I could almost remember how to breathe. Hey, Ava. How long are you gonna rest? Come over quickly and start cooking. Yes. I replied to my mother-in-law shouting and stood up. Then, the ring slipped from my hand and rolled under the bed. Oh no. Crawling under the bed to retrieve it, I noticed something unusual. What's this? There was something stuck to the edge of the bed. I picked up the ring and reached for the curious object. It was an envelope and a sound recorder.
What is this?
Feeling a stir in my heart, I turned on the recorder. Covered in dust, it was still functional. I could listen to the content clearly. Thank you, my dear. Tears flowed as I heard Chris's voice for the first time in 5 years. And then, I made up my mind. I could no longer live my life in tears. I must live looking forward. And for that, I needed exact revenge. I would make sure they paid for what they had done. Thus, I began investigating Dan's daily behavior. I looked into his conduct and work situation at the company and even talked to his ex-wife. Dan has a daughter, and it appears that the mother has custody. Despite his repeated requests to see his daughter, the ex-wife continues to ignore him. Moreover, it seemed he was frequently causing trouble at work, both through his arrogant attitude and his attempts to flirt with female employees. My desire for revenge wasn't directed solely at Dan, but also at my in-laws. I methodically gathered evidence and prepared for my revenge. A month later, as usual, I was called to my in-laws' house and was preparing dinner. You never improve in cooking. The taste is too strong. Are you trying to kill us? A woman like you should be grateful you're still connected to our family. Otherwise, you'd be homeless by now. Know your place. What's with that face? Can't you be a bit more pleasant? I'm sorry. I'll bring the alcohol now. While being berated, I continued to move mechanically as instructed. Absolutely charmless. While still complaining about me, Dan drank from the glass of alcohol. Don't let the glass go empty. As instructed, I poured more alcohol. Next to Dan, as he drank his second glass, I muttered. My husband also loved to drink. You brothers used to drink together often, didn't you? The gaze of my in-laws sharpened, and Dan glared at me.
Yes, that's right. It was the greatest pleasure of my life. But it's impossible now, thanks to you.
Dan splashed the remaining alcohol in his glass onto me. The sharp smell was unpleasant, but his reaction was exactly what I had anticipated. No, it's okay. My husband is here today. What did you say? shadows appeared on the balcony. One seemed to belong to an adult male, and the other, to a child about junior high school age.
What is this? What kind of joke is this?
I didn't respond to Dan's scream. My in-laws were flustered too, but they didn't seem as terrified as Dan. Then, the voice of my husband could be heard.
I was probably gonna be silenced by my brother.
My in-laws gasped, their eyes darting back and forth in shock. Dan's face turned pale for a moment, then he raised his voice as if to drown out my husband's.
Hey! What is the meaning of this? There's a limit to joking around.
My husband continued to speak, holding hands with our daughter.
I found out why my brother got divorced. I heard it was because he made advances towards his own daughter. After persistently asking my daughter, it became clear that he had made a move on her after I had fallen asleep during his visit. That's nonsense. Do you think you can get away with something like this?
Dan lunged at me, so I fled to a corner of the room. His gaze darted all over, and an abnormal sweat gleamed on his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, clearly showing his agitation.
My daughter is afraid to go to the police. From my behavior, my brother must have realized that I knew the truth. Sometimes he glares at me with a terribly frightening look. Stop it. Where is this coming from? Enough is enough.
Dan's breathing quickly became more labored, and his complexion turned a dark red. Bloodshot eyes frantically scanned the surroundings. He was clearly in a panic. It was evident to anyone that he was guilty of something. I looked at the man before me with cold eyes.
What's the matter? It's the voice of your beloved brother. It's been a while since you've heard it. Don't you feel nostalgic?
Dan glared at me. But his legs seemed to have frozen, unable to move.
What are you doing? Do you think you'll be forgiven? That's my line.
Dan was panicking. The man who had berated me for 5 years was now pale, which I found satisfying. Yet, it wasn't enough. I need him to be more flustered, my anger won't subside otherwise.
I persuaded my reluctant daughter to undergo prenatal DNA testing. The results are hidden in my room. I plan to go to the police, but it might be too late.
Finally, Dan let out an indescribable scream. He rushed to the balcony and banged on the window glass repeatedly. His mother, apparently panicked by his behavior, cautiously called out to him. She was probably worried the glass would break.
Dan, what's wrong? Calm down. Shut up. Stay back. Ouch!
My mother-in-law was pushed by the frenzied Dan and fell on her buttocks. My father-in-law rushed to help her up, but both seemed to be too scared to do anything but stare at Dan's drastic change.
Stop! What's the use of doing such things now? It's all in vain.
Then, stepping out onto the balcony, seeing the figures beyond the railing made him go weak at the knees.
How?
His pale, frightened figure was almost comical. Dan, still seated on the floor, entered the room and continued to stare at the figures that appeared on the balcony.
How is this? Why are they alive?
Aren't you happy? Hearing my voice, he turned his head towards me. Even though he glared at me, I wasn't scared at all now.
What are you talking about? What does this mean? What is this voice? It's your doing, isn't it?
And what do you mean by what's the use of doing such things now?
Do you have any idea what Chris was talking about?
Dan was at a loss for words. After his gaze wandered for a while, he suddenly stood up with shaky legs and shouted.
It's a false accusation. I don't know what you're talking about.
My in-laws, who hadn't grasped the situation, snapped back to reality at his shout. They glared at me and raised their voices.
That's a bad joke. What do you think of your husband and daughter?
Realizing his parents were on his side seemed to calm him down a bit. Dan seemed a bit more composed now and walked towards me.
Yes, that's right. And what about those shadows anyway? You staged this, didn't you?
How could I?
Maybe your brother and niece came out because they resent you? Besides, how do you prepare the voice of someone who has been dead for 5 years?
He let out a weird scream. He sat down and covered his head with his hands. It was as if what he had done in the past was already clear. Yet, my in-laws seemed unwilling to give up.
This is a miscarriage of justice. There are things you should and shouldn't say. That's right. My son would never do such a thing.
How blissfully ignorant they are, even in this situation. But it seemed to have rallied Dan. With a sudden idea, he, still crouched down, pointed at me with a slight smile. Has he lost his nerve? How pitiful.
That's right. It must be projection mapping.
Oh, you figured it out, did you? Indeed, the shadows of my husband and daughter were created using projection mapping. While my in-laws and Dan were away, I had prepared a transparent screen on the balcony for the projection. A small projector was placed in the yard, projecting the figures from there. At night, neither the screen nor the projector would be noticed. Dan, not amused that I had admitted it so easily, turned red and spit in anger.
Resorting to petty tricks. You want to harass me that much? I could sue you for this.
Please do.
I was thinking of suing you as well. What did you say?
What I presented was the prenatal DNA test results my husband had left behind. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Dan's complexion turned a deep red again.
Give that to me.
Seeing him lunge at me, my in-laws screamed. Even for those who blindly sided with the eldest son, this behavior seemed frightening indeed.
This. If only this didn't exist. A mere piece of paper can't do anything.
He snatched the document from me and tore it to pieces. Then, as if relieved, he began to laugh loudly.
This thing. It's obviously a lie.
It's useless. Everything is useless. His blatant fear was as good as a confession. Moreover, tearing the paper without even re-examining its content was like a second confession. The belief that what was in front of him was real also betrayed a lack of composure.
The useless one here is you. Did you really think I'd bring the original here? The real document is safely stored away. What?
Dan ground his teeth and glared at me. Then the room's door opened.
You really don't know when to give up.
It's over for you.
Just accept it.
Dan turned pale as he glared towards the source of the voice.
I called her. She was happy to help.
She was Dan's ex-wife, Sarah Matthews. When investigating him, I had reached out to her, and she willingly agreed to assist in my revenge.
When you and I divorced, all we could do was run away. But now that I know the situation, I can't stay silent. I'll fully disclose the reason for our divorce. I've also got our daughter's consent. That's not the deal. We agreed you wouldn't sue if I agreed to the divorce. I'm not the one suing. I'm just going to share your past actions as testimony when Ava sues.
Hearing Sarah's words, he screamed, spitting in anger.
Traitor! What a shameless woman! What are you all talking about, ganging up on our Dan like this?
Despite being confronted by two men, Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, looking down on them with a sneer.
Don't you understand even in this situation? Or are you just pretending not to know? It's appalling. How dare you? Don't you have any respect for your elders?
Hiding behind her husband, my mother-in-law snapped at Sarah.
I've never liked you from the start. You're insolent and talk back. I never invited you into this house. Leave at once.
Receiving my in-laws' words, Sarah showed a face filled with utter disdain.
So, you took advantage of Ava because she wouldn't talk back? You made her work for your convenience? You're despicable.
It seemed to hit the mark. My mother-in-law's cheeks flushed.
You have no right to criticize after you left so quickly. How infuriating! Conspiring with another worthless daughter-in-law to harass us like this. Why should we have to suffer like this?
Their lack of self-awareness was astounding. After treating me like a slave and pushing me this far. If they hadn't discriminated against their own child, perhaps my husband might not have ended up like this.
Maybe it's because you spoiled your first son too much? Your beloved eldest son is now officially a criminal. Maybe you should reflect on the disgrace within your own family before you berate your daughter-in-law. Your victim mentality is quite remarkable at this point.
Dan's complexion changed. Being insulted by his ex-wife seemed to be too much for his pride. Despite everything being too late, he desperately furrowed his brows and glared at us threateningly.
A criminal, me? Don't be ridiculous. You might be aware, she was a child. It's considered a crime. Evidence, it's just that piece of paper you have, isn't it? As if I'd be arrested because of something like that.
His excuses were pitiful. I was utterly astounded. Sarah was just as incredulous as I was.
To tear up that piece of paper without even checking its contents, and then to still claim it as evidence.
Sarah let out a long sigh. I wanted to sigh too, but if that's what he wished, let me invite another guest.
It seems Dan is still not ready to admit his guilt. Since he seems to have forgotten what happened 5 years ago, how about we discuss something more recent? What?
The next guest I had called was Ryan West, one of Dan's subordinates. He's a reliable man who also helped with the projection mapping on the balcony.
I've been assisting Ava, so I thought I'd take this opportunity to greet you. After all I've done for you, you forget your gratitude.
Done for me?
Being blamed for failures, having my credit stolen, driving colleagues to resign, there are plenty of bad memories, but I don't recall any where you taught me. What?
Dan didn't seem to be able to stand up. He truly seemed to have lost his nerve. It's pitiful, but after being oppressed for so long, seeing him in this state is somewhat satisfying.
Manager's work attitude has been problematic for a while now. Your arrogant behavior and treatment of female employees have been causing headaches for everyone. Some of us, including myself, have already submitted recordings of the treatment we received from you to HR. You're definitely getting fired. What did you say? How are we supposed to live then?
Hearing that their pride and joy was gonna be fired, their first concern was their own livelihood. How shallow can they be? I was at a loss for words in dismay. Sarah seemed to share my sentiment, and we exchanged looks. Ryan, although probably feeling the same, remained smiling as he dealt with my mother-in-law.
It would be nice if you could live on your pension. You think this is someone else's problem? You want to ruin us?
My father-in-law confronted Ryan. They probably thought he was intimidating them because he was still smiling, unlike us.
No, I don't think that at all. However, apart from the firing, we're also preparing for a lawsuit. Former manager, I should say. Including him, I can't exactly predict what your livelihood will look like. A lawsuit? Why would it come to that?
Dan was completely flustered, unable to keep up with the conversation. My in-laws were the only ones panicking. It felt good, but I felt sorry for Ryan being cornered like this.
Padding of the subcontractor fees has been discovered. It appears you were conspiring with the subcontractor's representative, but they've confessed, and the former manager's name has come up, so we're currently preparing for that. The police will be arriving shortly, so please prepare yourselves mentally.
My in-laws seemed to have lost their ability to speak. I observed the hateful trio's faces turn pale. After having my fill of their dismay, I decided to deliver the final blow.
This is the recorder containing my husband's will. The voice of my husband that played earlier was from this recorder. The data has already been saved elsewhere, so I decided to use this. For a month, I've been recording everything you've done to me. What are you saying, Ava? Don't suddenly start calling me by my name now. After all, you've been calling me hey, you, that one, haven't you?
The treatment I received from my in-laws and Dan was of a level that broke the law. After recording everything for a month, my lawyer confirmed it was enough to press charges.
I'm also ready to sue. This is a memento from my husband, and I thought I'd use it to move forward with my life. It's been very useful. It felt like my husband was helping me. He too received terrible treatment from you, so maybe this will give him some peace. To treat your own family like this, I can't believe it. After giving a place to someone with nowhere to go, you repay kindness with betrayal. Is it fun for you to hurt people? You're sick. That's not human behavior.
I'll return those words right back to you. They're facing ruin next anyway. If I don't pay them back for everything, I can't move forward.
I do love my husband, but I have no desire to remain relatives with you. I'll be severing our ties. Such a thing. That's impossible.
No.
I've already filed the paperwork. With my husband's passing, I can officially withdraw any relation to you based on my own will.
My in-laws were saying something, but whether they were too confused or too emotional, their words were unintelligible. They just seemed to be red in the face and spitting.
Please don't rely on me no matter how much trouble you're in the future. I have never and will never rely on you. We are now strangers to each other.
My in-laws shouted something. Their words weren't clear, but I managed to catch their final retort.
This is on you. Never show your face to us again.
Happy to comply. All preparations were done. The prenatal DNA test results and the original of my husband's will have been submitted to the police, and Sarah has already given her testimony. Saying to them as if preparations were yet to be made was simply to wait for them to dig their own grave. As expected, Dan staggered towards us. We ignored him and walked towards the front door.
Don't think you can get away with this. I'll make you suffer.
As we left through the front door, he caught up and lunged at us with a fearsome look. But this was precisely the scenario I wanted.
Stop right there!
The police, responding to the call, arrived and grabbed his arm. He had just compounded his crimes. Really, simple people are so easy to handle.
As you've witnessed, I was just threatened.
The police nodded, and Dan, now restrained, yelled out. His voice was hardly coherent. To exhibit such disgrace in front of the police. Nothing but careless. He's finished, isn't he? Sarah whispered with a laugh, and I couldn't help but join in. It seemed she too had her share of troubles with him. Now happily remarried to a wonderful man, Sarah later shared with a smile that she finally felt she could move on in a real sense. Afterward, Dan was fired from his company and is currently under prosecution. It seems he's been sued for embezzlement damages so extensive he could never repay them in a lifetime. With rumors spreading and his face appearing in newspapers, it's unlikely he'll ever be able to secure a respectable job again. My in-laws also seem to be feeling the squeeze as rumors spread through the neighborhood. Despite receiving numerous apology letters from my in-laws, whose relationship with the neighborhood worsened after Dan's arrest, I've been ignoring them all. Threatening them with legal action if they persisted in bothering me finally made them back off. His parents, who once doted on their son, now curse him daily. Thanks to Sarah's introduction, I secured a position at one of her relatives' companies. With this, I should be able to start my true second life. Although I've been mourning and grieving until now, being able to retaliate, albeit belatedly, for my husband and daughter has gradually made me more positive. 3 years later. Ava, would you like to go see a movie this Saturday? Oh, that sounds lovely. What kind of movie is it? I've started dating Ryan, who used to work under my brother-in-law. It's a movie I think you'd like. Did you see the commercial for it yesterday?
I wanted to see that. Thank you, Ryan.
While I still love my husband, frequent communication with Ryan after that incident led to our relationship. I was genuinely surprised when he, 5 years my junior, confessed his feelings, but I learned he too had lost his wife early. As two people left behind, we've been spending our time together leisurely. Hello, Ava, Ryan. Oh, are you two on a date? Did we interrupt? I heard a voice from the entrance. Then, I stood up to greet the two of them. Welcome, Rhea, Sarah.
Don't tease us. We have cake, so let's all enjoy it together.
At Ryan's words, Rhea jumped up in joy.
I'm so happy. Thank you, Ryan.
I still keep in touch with Sarah and her daughter, Rhea. The people around me have been very kind, especially since I lost my daughter. Rhea is very close to me, And sometimes, when I think about how my daughter might have grown up like her, I feel a poignant kind of happiness. This way, I've managed to secure a peaceful and wonderful life for myself. I plan to continue living with gratitude and cherishing those around me. From today, we've decided to live in this house. I'd like to divorce you because you're in the way, but I guess you can stay as a maid," he announced suddenly, bringing home his mistress and their 3 children. Caught off guard by my husband's selfish declaration, I was speechless, my mind frozen in shock. His mistress, a flashy young woman with brightly colored hair, at least 10 years younger than me, giggled mockingly, "Is it really okay to say such things?" To which my husband proudly boasted, "She can't stand up to me, she's practically a slave." Silently, he then placed a hand on my shoulder, "So, I guess you'll be our maid from now on." The mistress smirked at me, saying, "Thanks," with a grin. If he wants the house, he can have it. I've no reason to endure any longer. No. I will divorce you and leave this house, so please do as you like with it, I told them firmly, facing my husband and his mistress directly. Thinking I was dependent on him, my husband was dumbfounded by my quick agreement to divorce, standing there agape. The idea that I was dependent on him was absurd. On the contrary, letting go of him meant I could finally be free. Afterward, my husband moved the mistress into the house, expecting to drive me out. But that was just the beginning of his nightmare. I am Hannah. I used to live with my husband and our son, a family of 3. Before marrying, I was a busy high school teacher. I met my husband at a social drinking event hosted by a friend. My husband took a liking to me the moment he saw me and persistently asked for my contact information. At that time, I had just broken up with my boyfriend and wasn't interested in dating anyone else, and my husband wasn't my type, so I brushed him off casually. However, due to my husband's insistence, my friends found it amusing and encouraged me to give him a chance. Overwhelmed by peer pressure, I reluctantly exchanged contact information, and from there, under his strong initiative, we started dating. Back then, he was very attentive, planning dates according to my preferences and always putting me first. Initially, I was reluctant, but gradually, I became attracted to him and we started dating. 6 months into our relationship, he proposed. The thought that marrying after just 6 months of dating was too soon crossed my mind, but I thought, he's so kind, it must be okay, and decided to marry him. Soon after our marriage, I found out I was pregnant with our son. My husband wanted me to quit my job and take care of the home, so, after years of teaching, I resigned. Though I loved my job and felt some regrets, thinking of my loving husband and our soon-to-be-born child, I had no regrets. My hometown is a plane ride away from where we live now, and worried about postpartum housework and childcare, I discussed having a homecoming birth with my husband. However, he insisted on helping and suggested we stay at home. Thinking he would help, I decided not to have a homecoming birth. Later, our son was born safely, and childrearing began. After a week in the hospital, I returned home, excited and anxious about living with my new family, only to find a shocking scene. Clothes were thrown everywhere, the table was littered with leftover takeout and containers, and the kitchen sink was filled with dishes and cups used by my husband over the week. The bathroom was piled high with dirty laundry. The room I had cleaned meticulously before my hospital stay was unrecognizable, as if a burglar had ransacked it. Standing there holding my son, my husband emerged from the back room and greeted me with a smile, "Welcome back. Since you've had a week to rest, make sure you work hard now." I thought he was joking when I looked at my husband, but he just tilted his head with a smile. What a situation. I held my head in despair. Before giving birth, I had quit my job and was doing all the housework since my husband was busy with work, and I thought that was okay. But I expected him to take care of the household duties himself while I was away. My husband is an adult. Frustrated by his completely unapologetic demeanor, I carefully chose my words and reasoned with him. I've only given birth a week ago, my body isn't fully back, and I haven't had much rest since I was taking care of our baby in the hospital. It's gonna be tough taking care of him,
and you said you'd help, which is why I didn't go back to my parents' house, remember?
However, my husband responded, I'm working, and taking care of the home is your job, right? Then he added, I guess I'll take care of him then, and sat on the sofa, turning on the TV. I was stunned by his selfish attitude and couldn't say a word. Moreover, I had to clean up the messy house quickly, or I wouldn't be able to take care of our son. Thinking this, I placed my son in the crib and hurriedly began to clean. My back and belly still hurt, but I pushed through the pain. When my son started crying, I hoped my husband would pick him up and soothe him, but instead, he just called out, he's crying. That's not what taking care of him means. Getting increasingly irritated from the fatigue, I decided arguing was a waste of time. Holding back my frustration, I demonstrated changing a diaper in front of my husband, saying, his diaper is wet, I'll show you how to change it. However, my husband never changed our son's diaper after that. Eventually, I managed to clean up our trashed house while carrying my crying son on my back. Meanwhile, my husband had fallen asleep on the sofa, and when he finally woke up in the late afternoon, his first words were, "What's for dinner?" Exhausted, I reluctantly decided to buy some prepared food from the supermarket. Of course, I walked there myself. Carrying my son to the supermarket, I wondered miserably why I was doing this. After all the effort of giving birth, to be treated like this as soon as I got home. It was clear that I couldn't expect any help from my husband going forward. I was already beginning to regret marrying him. Even after that, my husband made no attempt to help with the housework or childcare. He seemed to have taken paternity leave for a week after I was discharged, but he spent it staying up late playing games and then sleeping from morning until noon. On top of that, when our son's nighttime crying kept me awake, he would just say, "He's so loud, make him stop," as if it was nothing. I pleaded with him multiple times to help with the housework and childcare, but he just repeated excuses like, "Housework and childcare are your roles and I'm gonna be working alone when I start my job again, it's the same thing." He wouldn't listen. Exhausted and unable to think clearly due to lack of sleep, I eventually gave up trying to argue. In the end, the paternity leave was in name only, and he did nothing to help. I even thought I'd be better off without a husband at all. During that time, I gave up on expecting anything from my husband. They say postpartum resentment lasts a lifetime, and I really believe it. From then on, as if he didn't exist, I worked hard taking care of our son and doing all the housework. Playing with my little son was fun, but being a first-time mom was tough with so much I didn't know. There were nights when I woke up to deal with his crying, and evenings when I was rushing to prepare dinner and he just wouldn't stop crying no matter what. It's normal for little kids to have days like that. I had to be flexible, so on days like that, I took a nap when my son did or switched dinner to something pre-made. However, one day my husband noticed the house wasn't dirty and snapped, "Did you even clean today? The dinner is so simple. And the main dish, the croquettes, are just store-bought. Don't cut corners." No matter how much I explained that I couldn't keep up with housework because of taking care of our son, he would just say, "You're not working, so you must be free all day," and wouldn't listen. I was fed up with a husband who wouldn't help but was quick to criticize. Furthermore, I noticed that the living allowance he gave me started to decrease once our son began kindergarten. As our son grew, the costs for groceries and daily necessities increased, and there were rising monthly expenses. When I told him this, he insisted that everyone's salaries were going down due to the recession, but he was giving enough and blamed me, saying, "If there's not enough money, it's because you're not managing our finances properly," and accused me of wasting money. Looking down on me coldly, he spat out, "Don't ask for money when you don't work." Being told that, I was left speechless. Reluctantly, I started dipping into my savings from before I was married to cover the monthly shortfalls. As these days continued, my savings quickly diminished, and feeling a sense of crisis, I decided to return to full-time employment as my son started elementary school. Despite the gap in my professional life, I was anxious about finding a job but managed to get hired as a tutor at a learning center, leveraging my background as a former teacher. I was grateful that, considering our son was still young, I was assigned to teach early grades at the elementary school. When I told my husband I was getting a job, he just emphasized, "You're choosing to work, so don't put any burden on me." I took this as a clear sign that he expected me to continue handling all the housework and childcare as before. If I had told him I'm working because the money you provide isn't enough, he would undoubtedly have become enraged, and I couldn't predict what he might do. Besides, I already knew from our past life together that trying to discuss anything with him was pointless. While working full-time and managing the house was challenging, it became manageable as our son grew older and needed less attention. Now that I was working as a full-time employee, I realized that I wouldn't struggle if I divorced my husband. In fact, the thought of being free from stress and only seeing benefits started to frequently cross my mind. However, our son was attached to his father, who only played with him occasionally. My husband was the type to only take part in the fun aspects of parenting, engaging with our son only when he felt like it. Our son enjoyed the rough and tumble play that only a strong man could provide, and he was visibly happy when his father played with him. The thought of taking his father away from him through divorce, and the pain it might cause him, weighed heavily on my heart. So, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. Time passed, and our son became a high school student. By then, my husband not only stopped contributing financially, but also began staying out late under the pretext of work or being frequently away on business trips. As a teenager, our son, who had been fond of his father during his elementary years, started to express his frustration, saying things like, "Dad's not coming home again today," and seemed fed up when his father was home, doing nothing but sleeping. He also started to resent his father, who was hardly ever home but still criticized his academic performance. For me, since my husband was rarely home when I was awake, I got to spend more time just with my son, and we enjoyed a more comfortable life than before. Our son, perhaps taking his father's lack of involvement as a cautionary tale, became a helpful and sincere young man, voluntarily assisting with household chores without being asked. After studying hard, he managed to get into a national university that he could commute to from home. He spent meaningful years at university and secured a job at a major company, eventually moving out. On the night our son left, I felt a sense of loneliness but also a profound sense of accomplishment for having raised him well on my own. Now, I decided to live freely for myself. With that resolve, I began taking serious steps toward divorcing my husband, which I had put off until now. One holiday, while relaxing in my room, I heard the front door open, my husband's voice, and the sound of several people entering the house. My husband had been away for a while but seemed to have brought someone back with him. Curious, I left my room and saw that my husband had ushered the guests into the living room. As I approached the living room, I encountered a sight I had not expected, a flashy, younger woman by about 10 years, with brightly colored hair, and 3 children ranging from kindergarten to early elementary school age. Stunned by these unexpected visitors, my husband casually introduced the woman and shockingly declared, "I am currently dating her." Why would he boldly bring such a person into our house? While I was reeling, my husband further agitated me by flaunting a divorce paper and saying, "We've decided to live in this house from today. I would like to divorce you since you're in the way, but you can stay on as a maid if you like." His outrageous statement left me speechless. While I stood frozen, my husband and his mistress snickered, "Can you really say that? She's never stood up to me, after all." My husband boasted to his mistress that I was like his slave. He seemed to think my silence was due to fear, that I had given up expecting anything from him and let him do as he pleased, thinking resistance was futile. I had kept quiet for the sake of a peaceful life with our son, holding back my true feelings for his sake, not wanting to expose him to the distress of our arguments. I believed showing conflict would only unsettle our son's mind. Yet, misunderstanding my silence, my anger rose against my husband. He was now proudly telling his mistress that I had been like a dutiful wife, quietly awaiting his return, even when he stopped coming home. His mistress laughed crudely at his words. As I looked at the children sitting carelessly on the sofa, absorbed in their handheld gaming devices, seemingly indifferent to the confrontation among the adults, I asked my husband, "Whose children are these?" As if it were the most natural thing, he bluntly stated they were his and his mistress's children. According to him, he had started the affair with the mistress around the time our son entered high school, and had since fathered 3 children, building a separate family elsewhere. Judging by the children's ages, it seemed the relationship had led to pregnancy almost immediately. The cessation of financial support for our home was probably because of this. Since the living expenses he provided were already insufficient, leading us into debt, I had paid for our son's high school and college expenses entirely from my earnings. My husband surely knew that our son had gone off to college, but he never once brought up the topic of tuition. While I struggled to raise our son, my husband was engrossed with his mistress and their children elsewhere. The fact that he disregarded not just me, but our son as well, made my blood boil. In response to my silence, my husband casually placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Well then, I expect you to serve as a maid from now on." The mistress smirked at me, saying, "Thanks," while giving a mocking laugh. Facing them squarely, I spoke firmly. "No. I am divorcing you and leaving this house. Please do as you wish with it." Thinking I was dependent on him, my husband was stunned when I agreed so readily to the divorce, his mouth agape. I informed them that I would pack my things and leave the house today, then quickly returned to my room. I had been gradually reducing my belongings in preparation for the divorce, so packing was quickly done. I packed only what I needed immediately in a suitcase, organized the rest, and arranged for a moving company to pack and transport the remainder later. After finishing all preparations, I signed the divorce papers without hesitation. My husband had already filled out his part, so I said, "I will be submitting these now," and tucked them into my bag. Surprising him by leaving the same day, I left my puzzled husband and his mistress behind, and headed straight to the lawyer's office where the divorce papers were successfully filed. I lived in a hotel for about a week but soon rented a condo. It wasn't large, but it was enough space for me to live alone. Liberated from my husband, I relished my newfound independence. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I was enjoying a peaceful life when an unexpected call came from my ex-husband. Wondering what he could possibly want now, I hesitated but thought I should answer in case it was something important. Perhaps about our son or the house. Reluctantly, I picked up the phone. The first thing I heard was my ex-husband's desperate cry for help. Regretting picking up the call as soon as I did, I listened as he explained that his mistress's children were completely undisciplined, punching holes in the walls and scribbling all over them in a rampage around the house. Neither my ex-husband nor his mistress could manage any household chores, so the house was a mess, and he was begging me to come and clean. Predictably disgusted by the situation, I sighed in exasperation. Actually, before my ex-husband's mistress and her children moved into our house, they lived in a place where one of my friends also resided. My friend found it strange to frequently see my husband near her place and decided to follow him. She discovered that he was regularly visiting the mistress's place and told me about it. This was when our son was a senior in high school, which means I knew about the mistress and her children before my ex-husband brought them to our house. I had hoped they were not his children, but when he confirmed they were, I was furious. According to my friend, despite being only in elementary school, the mistress's children were notoriously bad, known in the neighborhood for shoplifting and staying out late, having been cautioned by the police more than once or twice. The youngest child, influenced by his older brothers, was already picking up bad habits, screaming foul language and showing violent behavior. Previously, they had been evicted from the house due to noise complaints and bad behavior. Even when child welfare officers visited because the children were left unsupervised, the mistress did nothing. My friend had told me that there were already many complaints about the mistress and her children from her neighbors, and it seemed only a matter of time before they were evicted again. So, when my ex-husband brought the mistress to live with us, I immediately realized they must have been kicked out of their place. I confronted my ex-husband. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Flustered, he admitted that since it was rented under the mistress's name, he didn't care if it got damaged, and as he usually dated her alone, he hadn't bothered about what the children were doing. Then, realizing I had known all along and kept quiet, he snapped at me, "Why didn't you warn me?" His childish blame-shifting and outburst were just so typical that I was utterly disgusted. Ignoring his ranting complaints, I mentioned I had business at the house, leading him to mistakenly think I was returning for good, and he happily ended the call. 3 days after that call, I visited the house with a lawyer. From the entrance, I could see windows patched with cardboard, torn lace curtains, and a glimpse of the disordered interior through the gaps. Only 2 months had passed since I left, and I was shocked at how rundown it had become as I pressed the intercom. My ex-husband opened the door immediately, retreating in surprise when he saw the male lawyer beside me. Mistaking the lawyer for my new partner, he aggressively asked, "Are you getting remarried or something?" The lawyer stepped between us, calmly introduced himself, and informed my ex-husband that they would be sued for damages.
Damages?
My ex-husband exclaimed in a high-pitched voice, shocked. Hearing this, the mistress hurried out from the back of the house. The lawyer presented the two with documents detailing the amount and specifics of the damages. They snatched the documents as if grabbing them, desperately checking the contents. And then their eyes widened at the sum demanded. After settling into a new place once I was forced out of the house, I thought of claiming damages from my ex-husband, so I consulted a lawyer. After explaining everything, the fact that they had children together, and his neglect of our family during that time, it was clear that a substantial claim for damages was possible. Considering the mental anguish since our son's birth, I felt justified in demanding a significant amount and told the lawyer to get as much as possible. Shocked by the high amount, they were initially speechless, but then my ex-husband pleaded for a reduction, citing repair costs for the house. The house was originally bought on a mortgage for a pre-owned property. Since my husband had stopped contributing to household expenses, I had been paying the mortgage, and there was still a balance remaining. Moreover, considering the house's age, it was about time for renovations, which would be costly. With this in mind, I easily handed over the house to my ex-husband and his mistress. Due to their children's havoc, the house had become quite dilapidated, so I anticipated the repair costs would be significant. When my ex and his mistress came begging for a reduction, I calmly told them, "If you two can't pay, I intend to contact both your parents to cover it. Similarly, if you don't agree to the payment of damages, I will contact each family." Hearing this, they fell silent in despair. The lawyer then prompted my ex-husband to sign the documents regarding the damages. Ensuring the payment was secured. Leaving the two heads in hands, we left the house. In the end, they've always had a habit of spending recklessly, so she couldn't come up with the money for her living expenses and asked her parents to help with. Her parents, who are quite strict, were furious upon discovering that their long-estranged daughter had been involved in an affair and had children with her partner. They went to the house where the mistress was living with my ex-husband, scolded both of them, and forcibly took the mistress back to their home. Currently, under her parents' watchful eyes, the mistress is working non-stop. Her children were also taken back to live at her parents' home, and after years of her neglect, they are now receiving strict discipline from their grandparents. It's tough for the kids right now, but reforming their behavior at this point is likely in their best interest for the future. Meanwhile, my ex-husband, left alone, is still living by himself in that rundown house. Although he managed to pay the damages, he couldn't afford the repairs for the house, and, astonishingly, it's recently started leaking from the ceiling while the windows remain broken. Even if he wanted to sell, the house, now dilapidated, is hardly worth anything, and selling the land it's on wouldn't cover the remaining mortgage. In desperation, the ex-husband contacted our son, explained his current plight, and begged him to mediate between us. However, having seen my struggles up close, our son, who now despises his father, he coldly dismissed him with a firm never contact me again. Rejected by his mistress and now by his son, my ex-husband was reportedly so shocked that he's been bedridden. Having secured the damages, I decided to use this opportunity to buy a condominium. I purchased a new condo in a convenient location near the station, which I can leave to my son if anything happens to me, and perhaps rent out later for additional income. After moving, my son often visits, and we enjoy meals together, just the two of us. He's doing well at his new job and absolutely loves his work. As for me, my career as a tutor at the learning center is going well, and I've even been approached about a promotion to become the head of the center, which seems likely to bring even more fulfillment. Having formally severed ties with my ex-husband, I feel liberated from the shackles that once bound me. Now, with my newfound freedom, I savor happiness every day. I've left it at the entrance. Take care of it for a week. What? What did you leave? My selfish sister-in-law, Allie, suddenly called me out of the blue. She said she had put her baby in a tote bag and left it at our front door. I moved yesterday, you know? As soon as she heard my response, Allie started yelling. I'm overseas. Find it now. I rushed to the house we used to live in, but the baby was nowhere to be found. I need to call the police. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, about to discover a horrifying truth. I had married Mike 10 years ago and we had been living together since. We had wanted children but hadn't been blessed with any, and before I knew it, I was 38 years old. Taking advantage of me was something Allie, 5 years my junior, did regularly. Her husband was a CEO, and my husband worked at his company. Using that leverage, it was routine for Allie, who lived just a 10-minute drive from us, to ask me to run errands. Moreover, since she became pregnant, she started demanding more of my time, making me clean her house and cook dinner. Even though I loved helping people, I told my husband she was being too demanding, but he asked me to keep an eye on her for a while longer, saying, I'll talk to her soon. Sorry, but please bear with it for now. He was probably under some pressure from Allie's husband. Thinking so, I would reluctantly go to her house whenever she called. My stomach feels so heavy. Look, Mary. Don't just space out, get the TV remote. What? You mean? What now? Allie was only 3.5 months pregnant. Yet, it seemed like her belly was showing quite a bit. However, she was naturally plump, so I kept my unnecessary comments to myself. Wouldn't it be better for a safe delivery if you moved around a bit? Don't lecture me when you've never been pregnant. This was exactly the case of if I say this, she says that. This child is going to be our heir. What's wrong with taking good care of him? Sitting arrogantly on the couch without breaking her imposing attitude, my nerves gradually wore thin as I was loaded with stress. But when I questioned whether it was even possible to know the gender of the baby at just 3.5 months, she flared up in anger. Your brain is outdated. With today's advanced civilization, we can know the gender right away. Unable to muster the energy to argue with my sister-in-law Allie, I listened to her complaints with dismay. You're just jealous because you can't get pregnant. It's really bad for the baby's prenatal environment. If anything happens to this child, it's gonna be your fault. Eventually, she started using the unborn baby to threaten me. Being around Allie became suffocating, and I continued to rush through errands and return home sighing. When I told my husband upon his return from work, he soothed me with, just hang in there a bit longer, and I continued to live with a heavy heart. The situation was so painful that whenever Allie called, I kept making up excuses to decline. Then Allie complained to my husband that I was being mean to her, leaving me in a tight spot. No matter what I said, Allie wouldn't listen and kept calling repeatedly. When I inevitably answered the phone, she screeched in a piercing voice that resonated deep into my ears. Mary, do you want to jeopardize your brother's position at work? You remember that my husband is the CEO, right? My husband, usually gentle and kind. I didn't want to cause him any trouble, so I had no choice but to go to Allie's place. As time passed, Allie gave birth to a boy a month earlier than expected. And surprisingly, the baby weighed over 9 pounds. I wondered if that was too big for a baby born early. But since I had never been pregnant, I guessed that might be normal. Allie named the boy Sky, and true to form, she called me after being discharged from the hospital to have me take care of the baby. Think of it as practice for motherhood, and do your duty as a nanny properly. You might not be so lucky yourself, though. Although Allie irritated me, I figured she must be going through a lot just after giving birth, so I visited her house whenever she called. Plus, I couldn't resist how adorable the baby was. Sky, you're such a good boy. Grow up strong. Changing diapers for the first time and bathing him didn't feel like a chore at all when I saw his face. However, after 3 months, Allie started dropping the baby off at my house. What's going on? All dressed up? I've got a dinner with people from my husband's work, and I'm tagging along. So, you take care of Sky, okay? As she got healthier, I realized being the wife of a CEO came with its responsibilities, but I diligently took care of the baby. Yet, as time went on, the frequency of Allie leaving Sky with me increased.
Counting on you today.
Isn't this a bit too much? You're not always accompanying your husband, right? My guy is handling a big business deal, and I'm helping out. You need to pitch in too. Allie, raising her voice, forcefully left the child with me and hurried out. I wonder how useful she can be in that flimsy dress. Despite my doubts, I couldn't just ignore the baby in front of me, so I tended to his needs. But that day was different. When I opened his diaper, Sky had diarrhea. He didn't have a fever and seemed otherwise well, so I kept the room warmer than usual and watched over him. In the evening, when Allie came to pick up Sky, I told her about his condition, and she confronted me loudly.
You're so useless. Did you feed Sky something nasty as a spite?
I shook my head to indicate no, just as my husband Mike came home. What's all the noise about in the entryway? Oh, brother. I trusted Mary with Sky because I believe in her, and now he's got the runs. Allie, usually harsh with her words, surprisingly spoke in a subdued voice and started crying. I get where Allie is coming from, but Mary has no experience with raising kids. It was chilly today, maybe he got a bit cold. I'll apologize, so please forgive her. My husband defended me, but since I hadn't done anything wrong, I didn't understand why he apologized, and I watched Allie and Sky leave with mixed feelings. As I began preparing dinner feeling down, my husband suddenly became serious and pulled an A4 envelope from his bag. Mary, we need to have a serious talk. Dinner can wait, please sit down. I couldn't believe the words he told me as he spread the documents on the table. And I was completely taken aback since I had never imagined such a thing. However, I realized his determination was firm and unwavering, and I quietly nodded. A week later, as I was unpacking boxes, Allie called.
I've left it at your front door. Take care of it for a week.
What? What did you leave? Don't play dumb. It's obviously my kid. You've already brought him inside, right? It turned out that since I wasn't home, she had put Sky in a tote bag and hung it on the doorknob. Hearing this, I was shocked and panicked.
Wait a minute. We moved yesterday, so we're not going back to that house. Go pick up Sky right now.
But Allie said, what? You're kidding again, and wouldn't believe what I was saying. However, when I insisted it was true in a serious tone, she suddenly panicked. It had been 5 hours since she left Sky. And she was currently on an overseas trip, which surprised me even more. It was supposed to be spring, but it was still a chilly day with temperatures not rising much.
Go pick up Sky now. Hurry up.
Before I could get angry at Allie's attitude, I was too worried about the baby and immediately drove to the house we had moved from. An hour later, I arrived at our old house and checked the front door, but there was no sign of Sky. The tote bag is gone, why? I searched around the yard thoroughly and asked the neighbors, but everyone just said they didn't know anything. No one heard crying? What does that mean? I was about to call the police as there seemed no sign of finding Sky, when I received a call from someone. What? What did you say? I was left speechless by the shocking content of the call. After hanging up, unable to organize my thoughts, I was wandering around when Allie called. He was in the tote bag at the front door, right? Ah, he's nowhere to be found.
Seriously? That's bad. If we don't find Sky, my husband might divorce me. It's gonna be your fault.
Allie's voice trembled so much over the phone, it was clear she was panicking. When I told her I'd report it to the police and have them look for him, she adamantly refused. That would blow this up into a big deal and my husband would find out.
Sky's safety is more important than your image. Sky is just a tool for getting money from my husband.
Hearing this, I was appalled by her selfishness. Ignoring my feelings, I could hear Allie talking to someone she was with. After a while, she lamented.
This trip's ruined now. Didn't get a flight today, but I'm coming home tomorrow. Don't you dare tell my husband. Call me immediately if you find Sky.
I'll do what I can. Satisfied with my response, Allie hung up. The next day, as I waited for Allie at the airport, she appeared arm in arm with a man. Seeing me, she approached with a scowl.
Mary! What are you doing here? Did you find Sky?
I came to tell you something important. Sky is out of your reach now. It was too late. As I spoke these words, looking down with a sad expression, Allie began to panic.
That's a lie. What am I supposed to tell my husband? You're useless. Find a similar baby right now.
How could you say that? Are you even a mother? Allie suggested that any baby of the same age could fool her husband. Anger and sadness overwhelmed me, and I couldn't help crying. But I quickly wiped the tears from my cheeks and looked her squarely in the eyes. Instead of looking for a similar child, you should be dealing with this person, I said, as a woman who had been hiding behind me, wearing a deep hood, showed her face. Not just Allie, but the man she was with shuddered visibly. Yes, she was the wife of Allie's lover. Too stunned to move, the man was confronted by his wife. You scum. I'll teach you some manners, as he pleaded weakly, please forgive me. However, there was no chance the wife would forgive her cheating partner, who was told to brace yourself. She slapped him hard across the face back and forth. It stopped passers-by in their tracks. She left the man, who had fallen and was clutching his cheek, and turned to Allie. Allie went pale and blurted out hastily. Please don't misunderstand. We are not in that kind of relationship. What? Mary, stop recording this with your smartphone. Even as Allie tried to deflect, I was holding up my smartphone to capture the moment, and she snapped back at me. But I remained calm. So, how do you explain this? I pulled out from an envelope I had brought with me the email exchanges and cozy photos of Allie and her lover that I had found on social media. Allie snatched them from me and glared fiercely. Snooping around like that is the lowest. How did you even find this guy's wife's contact info? I just happened to know her. What? When I first saw Allie's lover on social media, I thought his face looked familiar. Then I remembered he was the husband of a woman who worked at the salon I frequent. He was also a hairdresser, but while his wife owned several successful salons and was skilled, he hardly worked and was known for fooling around. A typical case of the hairdresser's husband. When I told his wife about Allie's affair trip, she said, I've reached my limit. I'm joining in, and came along with me. Normally gentle and kind, I was honestly shocked to see how terrifying she could be when angry. This playboy hairdresser, dominated by his wife, rubbed his hands together like a fly and repeatedly begged, please don't divorce me. However, she never nodded in agreement, making me feel a strong resolve. Moreover, Sky is the child of your lover, isn't he?
What? Don't make baseless claims without proof.
But being born a month early and weighing over 8.8 pounds is definitely too big. You've been fudging the weeks, haven't you? I said, pulling out documents from a different envelope. One was a mother-child health handbook. Additionally, documents proving that Allie's husband was not Sky's father. Playing dirty, huh? But if I tear this up, it's like nothing ever happened. Allie said, snatching the DNA test results from my hands and tearing them up, looking smug. I am sure she thought she could get through this, but it did not happen. You should talk directly to the person who gave me these documents. As I turned my smartphone screen towards Allie, her eyes and mouth widened in shock, ready to scream. No wonder she was stunned. On the screen was Allie's husband. I wasn't recording, I was on a video call with Allie's husband.
Allie. Lying about going to your parents' place, you really had me fooled.
That is, well, you see, what I mean is... Allie stammered, completely thrown off. Standing before her, I spoke slowly. Listen carefully, I'm going to explain everything one by one. A week earlier, her husband, suspecting something from the emails between Allie and her lover, had sent off for a DNA test for Sky. At the same time, he lied to Allie about going on a business trip for a week to monitor her actions. Then, Allie contacted her lover via email and promptly booked an international trip online. Caught up in the excitement, she didn't even think to erase her browsing history. On the day of the trip, Allie put Sky in a tote bag, hung it on the front door of my house, and skipped off to the airport, humming a tune. Her husband, who had been following her, took care of Sky. If he had been left at the door for over 5 hours, who knows what could have happened. What? So, Sky is alive? Yes, he's with him right now. I was about to call the police unable to find Sky when I received a call from Allie's husband. Surprised, but wanting more details, I immediately went to his house. Sky was full of energy, flailing his limbs and playing with a rattle. As I listened to the whole story, I remembered how Sky had been born a month early yet weighed over 8.8 pounds. At the time, I forced myself to accept it, but it seemed suspicious to me. After getting permission from Allie's husband, I searched through Allie's belongings and found the Mother-Child Health Handbook. Looking through it, I discovered that Allie had fudged the baby's weeks. Why had Allie done such a thing? When tracing back the actual timing of her pregnancy, it turned out that her husband had been on a long business trip for about 2 months during the relevant period. In other words, it was impossible for him to be the father. Realizing she was pregnant with her lover's child, Allie thought she could deceive him by about a month, but the baby ended up being unexpectedly big. That's how I became suspicious. At that point, the lover, revealed as the child's father, began apologizing profusely to his wife, banging his head on the floor as he knelt. However, his wife coldly said, "From now on, you'll live by your own means," and slapped the divorce papers down right there. She kicked the groveling man away and walked off, her departure marked by a clear, refreshing resolve. Meanwhile, Allie's husband wasn't silent either.
Of course, I'm divorcing you. Go be with that man.
No. I just liked his face. He has no money. So, you were with me for the money, huh? Allie choked on her words as her husband hit the nail on the head. Sky was just a tool to extract money from you, right?
Don't spout nonsense.
I heard yesterday's phone call, thanks to Mary. I had recorded it to ensure Allie couldn't deny her words if anything happened. Allie's husband, who had been silently listening to our conversation, had a face red with rage and deep furrows between his brows. Confronted with this shocking truth, Allie's body seemed to tremble slightly. But then, as if remembering something, she peeked at her smartphone screen. If Sky is okay, then it's all good, right? And hey, even if the blood isn't the same, I gave birth to him, so he's essentially your child. Both Allie's husband and I involuntarily exclaimed, "What?" at her absurd and selfish justification. Thinking she had dodged the issue. Allie put her hands on her hips, looking smug. With that, her husband said just one thing, "This is over," and abruptly hung up the phone. What are you going to do now? I did everything you told me to, right? Didn't you like it? She tried calling her husband from her own phone, but he had blocked her number and she couldn't get through. By the way, Allie. Did you know that leaving Sky in a tote bag and going out could be considered a crime? She shook her head vehemently, and when I showed her what kind of crime it could be on my smartphone screen, she shuddered and collapsed right there. Allie, it's goodbye from us too. Farewell. With nothing left to say, I walked away with a cold gaze, but I felt a chill down my spine. Turning around, I saw Allie with bloodshot eyes and twitching eyebrows, making a terrifying face.
I'll tell my brother. It's your fault this happened because you moved without telling me.
It was my husband who decided to move, feeling sorry for me being exploited by you. And he knows all about this situation too. He said he never wants to meet you again. Realizing she was abandoned by her brother, whom she thought was her only ally, Allie cried out loudly right there. Despite all this talk, not a single word of concern for Sky. How selfish can she be?
This is no time for tears. Go pick up Sky now.
If I'm getting divorced, I don't need the baby.
How can you say that? Unforgivable. I will never forget what you just said. Sky will never go back to you, no matter what.
I bid farewell to such a despicable sister-in-law, resolving at that moment to take a certain action. Afterwards, I reported to the police about Allie leaving the baby behind. Although Sky was quickly taken into care, the act was deemed far too cruel, and Allie was thoroughly interrogated by the police. Having been told she would be divorced by her husband and disowned by her own family, Allie found herself completely alone. She was sued for damages by both her husband and her lover's wife, demanding $30,000 each from her, and she ended up taking out a loan with the lover to pay these settlements. Unfortunately, the loan came from a shady company, and she ended up working in a grim place to pay it back. My resolve was to raise Sky as my own child. When I told this to my husband, he warmly accepted the idea. Oh, that reminds me, I forgot to mention that I'm also expecting a new life. I will nurture these children carefully, ensuring they live freely and grow